Let's get a quick overview of the inside of the cranial cavity. The first quite apparent thing is that, well, there are three different regions called three cranial fossae. There will be the anterior cranial fossa outlined in pink, the middle cranial fossa outlined in blue, and the posterior cranial fossa outlined in orange. And so these are actually large depressions that also lie at different levels, where the anterior cranial fossa is going to be the highest up, and then the middle cranial fossa is going to be a little bit lower down, and the last one is going to be the posterior cranial fossa. The anterior cranial fossa will actually, let me click on this button here, will actually be made up of several bones. First of all, highlighted in green, is going to be the frontal bone. And then centrally, you would have the ethmoid or ethmoid bone. And part of the body and the lesser wings of the sphenoid bone posteriorly here. Let me highlight the sphenoid bone because most of that is in the middle cranial fossa. Now you can see the body and the lesser wings of this sphenoid bone as well. The greater part of the anterior cranial fossa will be formed by these ridged orbital plates of the frontal bone. So if you would go straight through here, you would get to the orbits. This region in the middle, in between the two cribriform plates of the ethmoid bone, this is called the crista galli. It is an elevation. That means the coxcomb, and it's kind of the medial ridge that projects upwards, and you would actually have the dura attached here from the falx cerebri. And as I said earlier, you have the olfactory bulbs lying on here on this sieve-like cribriform plate that will be able to extend their special sensory axons through here to the olfactory epithelium. The middle cranial fossa is kind of shaped like a butterfly or a bat. It's outlined in blue here. The central part is composed of something which is referred to as the sella turcica, which means Turkish saddle, because you could imagine that this here does look a little bit like a saddle. Well, riding in that saddle would usually be your pituitary or hypophysis. And this is then flanked by four processes. These are called clinoid processes, two anterior and two posterior. The horn of the saddle is going to be this part here. That is called the tuberculum sellae. So it's just a slight elevation anterior on the body of the sphenoid. And the dorsum sellae is going to be this part that extends inferiorly and will then extend as a part called the clivus, which is like a slide that goes all the way down to the posterior cranial fossa, accumulating in the, or ending in the foramen magnum. There are a couple of important foramina in the middle cranial fossa. We can see, for instance, that on each side, the body of the sphenoid is going to be pierced by four foramina. They'll be perforating the roots of the greater wings of the sphenoid. You'll have, for instance, if we look anteriorly here and zoom in a little bit, you'll have the superior orbital fissure. You'll have the foramen rotundum, you'll have the foramen ovale, and the foramen spinosum. We will discuss what passes through these in the video specifically on the cranial foramina. The posterior cranial fossa is the largest and deepest of the cranial fossae. It will contain in life the cerebellum, the pons, and medulla oblongata. The fossa is formed mostly by the occipital and temporal bones. On the inside, we can see the internal occipital crest, which is this bony ridge here, and that will lead to the internal occipital protuberance. And if I turn this a little bit here, we can see that there are deep impressions here going transversely left and right, and after they have moved left and right, they actually will arc kind of shaped like an S. So this is the region, or these are the regions where the sinuses, called the transverse sinuses and then the sigmoid sinuses, would lie in life. The transverse and sigmoid sinuses are parts of the dural venous sinus system of the human cranial cavity, and the sigmoid sinus, after it is completed its tortuous S-shaped path, will exit through the jugular foramen.